Somehow this ended up being the longest project that I've ever worked on. And I mean that in terms of both strict definitions of the word. It definitely measures the greatest distance from end to end for any single piece that I've ever built, and it took a great amount of time to complete it. In fairness, I'd say that some of that was due to the piece itself, but other factors definitely played a part. Namely, a host of concurrent obligations and abbreviated days due to lack of materials. To put it in layman terms, other shit to take care of and having to stop a lot to go buy things. Now, so far in all the shots that you've seen, it's just been a bunch of me breaking down plywood. And I'll go over exactly what I'm doing and give dimensions in a minute, but first let me show you why I designed this thing the way that I did. So, without going off on too much of a tangent, when you have kids, you make a lot of design concessions. One of the big ones for us was pushing all of our furniture in our family room to the corners. This is great for maximizing open play space in the center, but bad for just about everything else. Also, 5 years later, with the birth of another kid and a business that we're running out of our house, a lot of things have piled up and we just need to use the space more efficiently. So here's the idea. Get rid of the existing media console, bring in the new one that we're building in this video here, and move the couch. And then once all that's done, reposition my desk so that I have a little corner area where I can film things, do voiceovers, and basically turn it into a slightly more functional space. As for the console itself that we're building, the goal is a really minimal, clean piece that can store more, making it a lot easier to quickly hide things when we're sick of looking at them. And I should also mention that in the coming months you're going to see a few more pieces for this room, namely some sort of TV wall setup, and probably a few pieces for my corner office. Okay, so back in the real world, I'm still breaking down plywood pieces, and that's because there was just a lot to break down. I would cut to another drawing to show you, but you're probably tired of drawings, so instead I'll say that all of this was made a lot easier thanks to this new sliding table attachment that I just installed on my SawStop. And in fact, I'll make a highlighted story on Instagram if you're interested in hearing more about it, and I'll link it in the description. Rest it up? Okay, let's go back to the drawings and talk about the piece. So the whole thing's about 12 feet long, 2 feet tall, and 2 feet deep. The top's going to be made of 3 12-foot boards that are edge-glued together. And the doors are going to be made from 3 more 12-foot boards edge-glued together, but then split into 6 pieces. That way the grain's going to look continuous when you put all the doors together. The cabinet's going to be made of 3 4-foot long plywood boxes with a vertical partition and adjustable shelves. The reason that I made 3 smaller boxes rather than 1 large box is because 1, I don't have 12-foot long pieces of plywood. 2, it would be pretty much impossible to move. And 3, technically this is modular and can be repurposed down the road as situations and locations change. Alright, that's a lot of background and design information, and surely I've bought myself enough time that I've finished breaking down the plywood by now, so let's check back in. Oh, awesome. Okay, so it looks like I'm measuring something here. And what's that? Okay, a table saw blade, and are you kidding me? Alright, you know what? I'm just gonna stop talking and let myself finish up the plywood. Okay, so with my plywood finally cut to its finished dimensions, the next step was to drill some shelf pins in the side pieces of my cabinets for the adjustable shelves. I decided to put 3 of them, starting a little bit more than halfway up onto each piece. And then I could drill pocket holes into everything for assembly. The last thing that I had to do before I could assemble everything was to cut rabbets along the backs of each of my pieces to hold an eventual back panel. And I actually messed up on this, so you'll notice in some of the shots moving forward that you'll see extra shelf pins on the bottom of the pieces. And that's because I just flipped them upside down and drilled new shelf pin holes. So here during the assembly, I'm doing something else wrong. Though technically it isn't a mess up, more of a, let's say, experiment. And this is that I'm pretty sure that pocket holes should actually be on the other side so that they're angled away from the edge of the plywood instead of towards it. Basically, I just wanted to see if it was noticeably weaker. And it honestly still felt plenty strong to me, but just advise your manual, not me, I guess. After the 4 exterior box pieces were put together, I referenced that to size my vertical partitions. And then I could cut those down to size, add the necessary shelf pin holes, and install them. Then I just had to cut a back panel to size, install it, and finally I could move on to the hardwood portion of this project. Okay, so here I'm just sort of examining all of my hardwood. This is white oak, by the way. And I'm basically just looking for and removing any staples that I find, and also figuring out which pieces I want to use for the doors, which I'll use for the top, and so forth. Also, shout out to Real Lumber Service in Anaheim, the place where I go to get all my boards, for sourcing these extra long pieces for me. Like I said, I needed nice, clean, clear 12-footers, and they came through for me big time. In fact, they got me pieces that were a little bit longer than 14 feet. Also, shout out to the Honda Ridgeline for handling these guys. Woo! Just drove like 14 miles with 14 footers in the back. Ridgeline handled it well. Maybe not as much, but I made it. Good job, Ridgeline. That was a scary drive. Next, I cut my boards down to about 12 feet and 3 inches, so that they'd be short enough that I could actually run them through my table saw. I measured from the front of my blade to the back wall, and this gave me about an inch to spare. And once that was done, I could get to work on the doors. Like I mentioned earlier, I want the doors to have a continuous grain pattern moving across the entire 12 feet. So this meant that I had to keep all of my pieces organized as I moved along. So I started by cutting them into 3 pieces that were about 4 foot 1 inch long each. And I made sure to label everything so that I wouldn't get it mixed up. And you can see my system here. And then later on, each of these sections is going to get cut into 2 doors. So 6 pieces in total. Next, I had to rip a clean edge onto each piece. So I made sure that I removed the same amount off of each edge of the corresponding pieces. And my goal here was to end up with not only a subassembly that would be the same width, but with each individual piece within that subassembly having the same width. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's set the doors aside for a minute and get our top glued up. Here I started by ripping each board on both ends to clean them up and make them a consistent width. And this was kind of tough on the rough end due to the length. Basically, as you can see in this shot, I had to just keep adjusting my featherboard as I went due to the bow, but once that edge was clean, ripping the other edge was really easy. And I should mention that the reason that I was able to do this was that the first edge that I referenced against my fence was clean enough. So if you have 2 rough edges to begin with, definitely do not do this. You're going to need to either join it first or make some sort of a jig for straight line ripping. Once my 3 boards were clean, I had planned to edge glue them and use dominoes to keep things coplanar, like I did with my doors. But as it turned out, I had run out of the bigger dominoes, so I decided I would use the smaller ones. And then, as luck would have it, I broke my bit about 3/4 of the way through the first board. And since I didn't want to have any downtime, I decided to just go for it and edge glue them with nothing. And this honestly worked fine. It just meant that I needed to do a little bit of extra sanding. Right, back to the doors. I had a small amount of cleanup that I had to do on a couple of the uneven spots with a card scraper, and after that I could head back over to the table saw and start refining everything. So here I'm ripping them to width and then cross-cutting them to length and turning each sub-assembly into 2 individual doors. And again, I'm making sure to keep everything labeled here so that I can keep it in order. And I'm also aiming to keep everything about 1 inch oversized at this point so that I can trim it up nice in the next step when I fit the doors. Speaking of which, next I marked and installed my hinges, which are all Bloom full overlay soft close hinges. And while I'm doing that, let's take a second to thank this video's sponsor, FilterBuy. So if you've never heard of them, FilterBuy is a direct-to-consumer replacement filter brand. They stock over 600 air and furnace filter sizes and will even custom produce filters for you if needed. They're located and produced here in the US, and all their orders ship for free and within 24 hours. And if you opt to subscribe, you save 5% off every order. And personally, I think that this is the way to go. Now, I happen to live in Southern California, where we run our AC pretty consistently for about 4 months of the year, and really only use our heaters sporadically as needed during the winter. So basically, our filters get a relatively light workload compared to other parts of the country. And I think that actually makes it harder to remember to change them. So I got it set up where every 3 months, a new set of filters arrives, and when they do, I know it's time to change them. Basically, I set it up one time, and now I never have to think about it again. The 5% saving is great, but not having to ever think about it, why, it's like having a 1/6th percent. And I'll take that over seeing dead people any day. So check out the link below and save some time and money. Alright, thanks FilterBuy. With my hinges installed, I started in on what was probably the slowest part of the project, fine-tuning the fit of the doors. And this is the reason that I left everything oversized previously, because now I can really just worry about making sure that I have a nice gap where the doors meet in the center, and then cut the other 3 edges of the door flush to the cabinet once I have the center gap just right. And again, this process is kind of slow going, removing hardware, making a cut, putting it back on, but it's really the case of a few extra minutes here to save you a lot of headache down the road. Once I had everything fitting just right, I cut my door handles. And I wanted something relatively minimalist, or unnoticeable, so I went with this angled groove along the top. I guess my overall goal with this entire piece was a sort of monolithic, really plain looking long box. And it's funny because it's that super clean, simple approach which made the project take so long. You know, lots of fine tuning to get everything just right. It's almost like the more simplistic the look is, the longer it takes to achieve, at least to a certain extent. But it's sort of counterintuitive in a way. Okay, we're getting down to it. Next, I called in the big guns, my buddy Jason, to help me sort of guide the top as I trimmed it down to its final width. After that, I used a router to put this rabbet detail along the front edge, and the purpose of this was so that there would be a little clearance for the doors to be able to swing freely. To cut the top to its final length, I used a combination of a trusty woodpecker square, a couple of clamps, and my circular saw. And this worked out amazingly well. I checked the edges after and they're perfect 90, so I'll definitely use this technique more in the future. Next, I used my palm router with a roundover bit to soften the perimeter of the top, since it'll probably get touched by kid hands quite a bit. So I know it looks like I'm moving really fast here, but I'm actually going really slow, and that's evidenced by the movement of the sun. Or, well, technically I guess it would be the rotation of the earth. You know what? That's another argument for another day. But I'll tell you what isn't up for debate. And that's that Simple Finish by Maker Brand Co. is my hands down favorite finish out there. And that might be because I'm 1/6 the owner of it, but biases aside, it really is, well, super simple to use. Wipe on a couple coats, let it penetrate, wipe off the excess, and Bob's your uncle. Alright, so after I'd let things dry for a couple days, I could start rearranging the family room and move this sucker in. Our initial plan for how we're going to actually use it is to find some bins that fit nicely inside of each cubby, and then as we transition away from kids' toys in the coming years, I may come back and retrofit some drawers or something. And the reason that I say or something is because, truthfully, I don't know. It really all depends on what our needs are in the future, and we'll just have to cross that bridge when we come to it. But for now, I'm comfortable putting my faith in the fact that there is one constant. And that is, no matter how things change, big empty boxes where you can throw a bunch of shit never go out of style. Special thanks to Matthew Tominick, Danny McIntyre, Fernando Larrazabal, Taiwei Yoon, BT, John White, Stephen Mendoza, Adam Baldwin, Alex Heap, Bradley Cole, Kareem Zughabe, and the rest of my Patreon members for making these videos possible. You guys are the number one thing that keeps my channel going and growing. And I know that I try to say thank you a lot, but I also know that it can never be enough. So seriously, thank you. And if you want to find out how you can support the show too, check out the Patreon link in the description and see if it's right for you. And as always, no pressure. Alright, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.